Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
It's good to be back. I'm a little freaked out. It seems like you had a good show without me, and I need to...
Oh, you were very missed, though, Matt. I mean, Graham Weiss was okay, but the whole time I was saying, oh, if only Matt were here, this would be such a better show. So it's really good to have you back, Matt.
The next time that you have to have a guest, I'm going to insist on subpar performance. But
thank you for Graham for filling in on short notice. Now, you were doing something fancy while you were gone.
I went to Seattle, and with the 3-hour time difference, my wife came along. I gave a speech out there. I also had to write, so like one day I was kind of holed up in a hotel room writing my column. Had lunch with Katie Herzog of The Stranger, and it was cool.
A serious Blue America tour for you.
And our friend Carrie Mickelson.
Yeah.
That you and we had lunch with her at Sfolina, I believe it was in D.C.
DMZ superfan.
Superfan, yeah. So anyway, the great people in Seattle, great town, great seafood. So, but with all the demands that I had on me that week, I appreciate you, plodding on without me as difficult as I know it was.
I feel like Seattle might be like the bluest place you've ever gone.
Maybe because it's just so blue. I have been to San Fran. I'm sure they would give Seattle a run for their money. And I'm going to be in Austin at the end of the month interviewing Bill Weld for my podcast. So that's a very blue part of a very red state, of course. I
can make an argument Seattle's bluer than both. But I don't have the data at my fingertips.
Well, as I just had Katie Herzog on my podcast at Lewis in the News, and this is a liberal. She's like she says that she's between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, mm-hmm. and she's a lesbian, and yet she is considered to be like outside the mainstream of Seattle,
right?
And there are these stickers of her all over town accusing her of being a transphobe. So that'll give you an idea of how woke and progressive Seattle is. That she is not. Like, she is too far out of in the right wing for Seattle.
I look forward to that podcast. Well, why don't you and I get down to business here? So yesterday was the 7-hour CNN Climate Forum. There was been a big push by climate activists to have a formal DNC-sanctioned presidential climate debate, which the DNC has said they won't do. They don't want to set a precedent of single-issue debates because once you do one, then you got to do it for everybody, and someone's going to get mad. But CNN then said, okay, we'll do a forum, so it's not a debate. It's one candidate after another. And, I mean, quite frankly, for CNN to give up 7 hours of TV time, this is probably not the most, this is not guaranteed ratings gold to do 7 hours on climate, so it's unusual for any TV station to do that. I think MSNBC is going to do a 2-day one coming up, and I don't know if you caught any of it, Matt, but I do think it showed the Democratic Party on the whole is unified on climate issues, but when you get down to the details, you do see divisions form, and we saw some of that yesterday.
Yeah, no, I know that in general they're all in favor of a carbon tax.
But not everybody.
Oh, so do tell. Who is not?
Well, I didn't see everybody, so forgive me if I'm missing somebody, but I believe Biden said he was, which I think is, if not quite new, I think is relatively new. And I don't know if Bernie was asked directly. I didn't see all of Bernie's appearance, so forgive me if I missed something important there. I do know that when Bernie ran in 2016, he was vehemently for a carbon tax. I mean, that was the thing. This was the proof that he was more serious about climate than Hillary Clinton was. And then he released his big climate plan a couple weeks ago, which we talked about on the show here, which is the biggest just on sheer dollar figure, and on the proportion of that dollar figure which is public and not private money, because Bernie is 100% public money and 0% private money. All the other candidates have padded their numbers with there'll be a combo of public and private. But in that plan, Bernie did not mention carbon tax. He didn't say he was against it, just was not present in the plan. So that's a shift away from it for him. And I know Beto was asked point blank about it, and he said he was not for a carbon tax. He was for cap and trade. And cap and trade is something that hasn't been the trendy climate position. I mean, it's what Obama tried to do. It's what had long been the goal for Democrats. It's what Europe has done. We have regional cap and trade systems in the country currently, so as a way to kind of build upon what is already in place. But because it didn't pass under Obama, and it was always seen as a relatively moderate climate solution because it relies a lot on market mechanisms. The more democratic socialist left has really rejected that, and some have even thrown carbon tax into that quote-unquote neoliberal category along with cap and trade, because you're still relying on markets. You impose this tax to adjust the price of goods and affect market behavior. It's not just straight up funding the clean energy production directly. So I do think you have a degree of division on that point, although I do think by and large, when I've seen the spreadsheets that various media organizations have done, do you want to price carbon? And carbon tax is a way to price carbon, as is cap and trade. The vast majority of Democrats say, yes, I want to price carbon.
Right. And as you know, Bill, there are prominent Republicans who support a carbon tax. Some of them want to basically replace like an income tax or a payroll tax with a carbon tax.
Or modify.
Some of them want it to be returned to households in the form of a dividend check. Mm-hmm. So none of these people,
these prominent Republicans are not in office anywhere, and they're not elected officials.
And they're also not really part of the Trumpian zeitgeist either. These are generally people who had a bright future behind them.
I mean, James Baker and George Shultz are the two biggest.
Yeah.
And therefore, carbon tax with the dividend. We raise the carbon tax and give all the money to taxpayers, which is what John Delaney, who you talked to on the subject, he's also for that.
And there would also be the provision that would get corporate buy-in on this in exchange for not litigating or not sort of retroactively going after them, giving them.
And that point is something that I feel is a big point of discussion that we're not discussing. So you saw some Democrats yesterday, I think Bernie most prominently, saying, I'm going to sue them, polluters are going to pay, I'm going to make them pay, which, if you didn't know about the Baker-Schultz plan, you would just say, well, sure, well, of course, they polluted, they should pay for it.
Right.
That's the principle of the long-standing Superfund program. If you dump toxic sludge into the water or into the ground, you did it, you clean it up. Common sense point. And so to say that in a climate forum or a debate, that's going to be a natural applause line. But you have out here conservatives saying, hey, I'll meet you halfway. I'll do the carbon tax. And, I mean, obviously you get into the question of how big is that carbon tax going to be. But if you could get to a point where, I think this is of a size that would actually reduce our carbon in a sufficient enough amount to avoid a climate crisis and enough time. If you are somebody who says that is the most important thing to do,
right?
Averting the climate crisis is the most important thing. If you could do that,
and if you agree, as I know you do, Bill, that getting corporate buy-in is important.
Well, I would be putting that debate aside for a second.
Because you made this argument about healthcah and other things.
Yeah, I'm happy to make it. But if I was talking to somebody who is not in my mindset on that point, who is not internalized the benefit of corporate buy-in for these things, if you just believe, just first and foremost, we got to save the climate, save the planet as fast as possible. If someone came up to you and said, "Okay, as representative of corporate America, are going to help you to do that. I'm going to put our resources into doing that. I'm going to fund ads to convince conservatives to come along with this project, and they won't be able to say it's going to kill jobs because I'm going to help them. I'm going to help you refute that point. all you got to do is not sue me and make me pay for everything. Would you take that deal?
Right. Do you want to get even, or do you want to get ahead?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want revenge, or do you want to actually reduce carbon? I would also say so, and obviously Elizabeth Warren wants revenge, but not only that, Bill. There's also the nuclear issue, which is, I think, the best energy form in terms of reducing carbon, that a lot of Democrats, including, I think, Elizabeth Warren.
Right, but I know Bernie and Warren said explicitly they would reject nuclear power. They want to not fund any new plants. I mean, Bernie's plan says he wants to decommission what's currently here. Like, he wants to zero out nuclear.
Not only insane to me, if you actually care about reducing carbon, but also if you want to have a hope for some sort of a bipartisan deal, which I think you have to have a bipartisan deal if you want A, to pass something, B, to pass something that would actually be durable, that would withstand the cyclical nature of our politics and the rise in a Republican trying to reverse it someday.
There are a lot of climate hawks who agree with that, who say, look, save the climate's the most important thing. Nuclear is a very low carbon energy source. You'd be crazy to get rid of something that's currently in the mix that's already helping us towards that goal. And without having a lot of data in front of me, my sense is it is more older liberals who have hated nuclear, since 3 Mile Island, who are very focused on the fact that we don't have a great, nuclear waste solution yet. I mean, we've gotten by with sort of patchwork solutions up until this point, but they feel that that's not what we have is not tenable, and therefore it should not be considered a safe, environmentally friendly source, and it should be eliminated. So that is I don't recall. Again, I didn't watch all 7 hours, so forgive me if I'm missing something.
Bill,
I don't recall any
all I
Democrats
ask
saying,
is that you come prepared for this.
What's
and
that?
I kind of question your commitment to addressing climate change. If you can't sit there and watch 7 hours of this, I'm not sure we can have this discussion.
I just feel like I was on Twitter enough that if someone said, yes, I'm for nuclear, that would have got over my feed and I would know about it. And I didn't see that. I believe Bernie and Elizabeth were against it. Other folks didn't mention it directly. But, Obama's cap and trade, the bill that passed the House, the Waxman-Markey bill, did not ban nuclear. I mean, it was silent on it, but just as a matter of fact, nuclear does well in a cap and trade environment because it's not a carbon polluting source. So they were very happy with what came out of the House. So my personal attitude is, it's kind of a moot debate. It's here. It's here. It's been here. I mean, Bernie is the one actively saying I'm going to remove it. But I think in all practically speaking, you may not add to it. You may not want to.
But we should be. I mean, we should be. If you're going to have a robust plan to address this and get bipartisan support, it would seem to me that a common sense, sane, moderate sort of solution would be carbon tax. Don't attack fracking. Don't attack.
Fracking is another subject, which there was some overt disagreement on at the forum yesterday.
Build nuclear plants.
My point about nuclear is whatever you feel about it, it's here. It is already here. Like that, I feel that debate has been won and lost already. And even if you didn't spend more money on it, it is still going to be here. It is part of the energy mix. So you might as well just accept that fact and make an energy plan with that understanding. And then it becomes a question of, is that the best use of your resources? I mean, nuclear power plants are pretty expensive. So I think there's an argument that, okay, you may not want to get rid of what you have, but is that your best bang for the buck? No pun intended, going forward. So without having me weigh into that debate, I just feel like you have nuclear, you're going to have nuclear, accept it. Now, fracking is something that I know Bernie wants to ban. I forget if Warren said something about it, so I apologize not knowing that. But I know Klobuchar said she would not ban fracking outright. and Biden said he would not ban fracking outright. I mean, there was, we would let states and localities ban if they want to. We're not going to subsidize it. But they were more about regulating what we have as opposed to flat banning it. And that's something else where, fracking produces more carbon than nuclear, produces more carbon than wind and solar, but less carbon than oil and coal. So in Klobuchar's formulation, this is a good transition fuel. You want to, and quite frankly, a lot of the carbon reductions we have had in the past several years is due to a shift from coal to natural gas. And fracking is part of the natural gas boom. So you can say, hey, this is helping us. Don't stop what's helping us. And others that say, this is, just delaying this is slowing the crisis. It's not ending the crisis. So that's not a good solution.
Yes. Well, okay. So I think, I think you could cobble together a pretty good plan if you did carbon tax that was revenue neutral, if you did nuclear and fracking. That would be a start, right? But it seems to me that that there's no reason to believe that Republicans would support currently even that modest proposal, or that Democrats would support it, right? Based on what we saw.
I wouldn't do broad brush there, because I think there are a number of Democrats that would work with Republicans on that. I mean, Bernie, no. Based on what he is on paper. I mean, obviously what you say on paper today may not be applicable tomorrow, but based on what's on paper, he's shooting the moon. It is $16 trillion of public money over 15 years. It's sue the polluters. It's ban nuclear and fracking. It's save the planet or bust, and there's no compromising from that fact. And other folks, if there was an opening, if they felt there was an actual opening to say, hey, let's do a carbon tax that's revenue neutral. Now, mind you, there are Democratic socialists that don't want a revenue neutral carbon tax, or even a carbon tax at all. But if they were to accept a carbon tax, it would be to raise revenue. It would be to raise revenue to plow it into direct creation of clean energy, creation of jobs, mitigate impacts for impoverished areas, and so forth.
Right. So then it becomes part of this almost like National Socialist
that's literally what
agenda.
It is. That vision is to say capitalism is why we have a climate crisis, and this is our opportunity to move off of that failed economic model into a democratic socialist model. So
and then you end up getting into things like don't eat cheeseburgers, let's fund abortions to help the environment, right?
Well, we don't need to be sensationalistic here, Matt.
Well, my point is only to say, aside from the depressing news that this is like another issue where there isn't likely to be compromise anytime soon, isn't there potential, Bill, in the short term that this is politically toxic for Democrats in elections?
Well, I think climate is a very complicated political subject. Once you get on the top line, do you want to save the planet? Yes. That's, do you believe in that what scientists say about climate is true? Yes. Like that stuff's the easy stuff. What you're going to do, what are you going to do about it? Then it gets more complicated. Anything that starts to change your quality of life, your behavior, what you have to pay for things, that's where it gets complicated. And, there are a lot of plans out there that are designed to not complicate your life, to not force a lot of personal sacrifice for you. The whole cap and dividend project, the whole impetus of that is we're going to tax polluters and give you money. You get a check. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So it's not like it has to be something that is painful, but you are talking about something that's going to change a lot of how goods are produced and what goods cost. And so, let's say a carbon tax model, for example. Carbon tax will make things that produce carbon emissions more expensive and things that don't produce carbon emissions less expensive. That's the idea. It's going to change your buying behavior. So, on one hand, if I'm going
and I think you could argue that the current pricing is actually artificial, because there is indeed a cost that we're just not putting in the price tag.
Exactly. And that's why if you can explain it that way, it's not inherently liberal or conservative to acknowledge that fact. I mean, once you're accepting the science of the subject, once you're accepting that just take it, let's say climate, think about just a more common pollution, dumping sludge in the water. Mm-hmm. If it's going to cost money in medical costs to deal with the cancers you create by that environment, that's an economic cost that's not priced into the good that made the pollution in the first place.
Right.
That you and I have to pay for. So you can, in theory, get consensus, regardless of ideology, on those factual points.
Yeah.
And then you can talk about policy solutions, from there. So if you if a carbon tax solves that market failure to incorporate those costs and put those costs into the economy, you might if I can power my house through renewable energy and not fossil fuels, and it's going to save me money or keep things status quo, great, no skin off my nose. However, if it's going to make the cost of buying ground beef much more expensive than buying an Impossible Burger, you might either say, okay, well, I guess I'll buy the Impossible Burger, it's cheaper. Or you might say, oh no, I'm never going to buy my ground beef ever again. They're going to price out of reach for me, and you'll be mad about that fact. So it's those sorts of things.
Right.
So it's really not a question of banning beef. I mean, I don't think there's been any proposal out there that would ban it outright. But I think there is a legitimate question of how expensive would it get? How expensive would certain things that you are comfortable with? How expensive would charcoal briquettes be?
Well, I mean, I think part of the concern is that when you get into the into the social engineering. So in other words, using the climate change regime not to reduce carbon, but to achieve all sorts of other quote unquote goods that progressives think as part of their religion. And I think that's a real concern. Let me bring up, though, a couple of the other kind of long-standing conservative rebuttals or I think things that have actually just prevented movement on this, and they're not illegitimate. One of them is that the climate always has changed. I went to the David Koch Dinosaur Museum or whatever at the Smithsonian a couple weeks ago. I took my kids there, and back in the dinosaur days, the climate was much, much warmer than it is today. That changed. It wasn't because of pollution or whatever or industry. We know there was a little ice age a couple hundred years ago. So conservatives say, yes, there is climate change, but there's always been climate change. The other one is the notion that that really, if China and India don't address this, then we're basically peeing in the ocean, so to speak, and we're essentially unilaterally disarming, harming our own economy. And it won't really make a difference to the temperature, over the course of time, unless China and India buy in on this.
Well, to your first point, I think that's more easily rebutted. I mean, this is a question of science and what climate scientists tell us. I mean, sure, climate might always be changing to some degree, but we have mountains of data to say that humans have changed it in a very radical way over the last century, and it's currently causing. You're seeing the more extreme hurricanes. You're seeing the glacier melt up north. This is not theoretical anymore. It's literally happening in front of our eyes, and it's going to keep happening unless you do something about it. And to the second point,
and look, and the other point is there were consequences when the climate changed in the past.
Well, sure. But you could say, hey, ice ages happen, and we're all going to be frozen in giant blocks of ice, and that's what God wants. I mean, you could go to that conclusion. But what's happening now is not just the natural climate cycle. We have done something to upset the natural rhythm of things, and we should correct that so we don't cause needless problems. So the second point, there's not a debate. I mean, everybody understands this is a global problem, and the U.S. can't solve it by itself, and certainly needs everybody, China, India especially, but it needs Europe and needs other developing countries. I mean, the challenge with China and India is, they can correctly say, hey, America, you polluted the planet for over a century, so you could be economically dominant, and now you're saying we can't. We have to be economic second-class countries. You get to get away with it, and we don't. And not to mention that you are still the greatest polluter over time. So China arguably has eclipsed us recently, but you talk about over the 100-year period, we're still the champs. We're still the carbon emission champions. So it's got to be a global solution to get it done properly. You need that buy-in, and then the question is: do you take the leadership position, or do you do nothing until everybody is doing the maximum amount at the same time?
Right.
And so the Paris Agreement is essentially in between those 2 points. It is a global agreement that we all have to do our part. It doesn't mandate that everybody has to do the exact same thing. And the targets that it has, most climate scientists would say, is not sufficient in and of itself to avert the crisis. It's a step forward, but it's not all the way there. And certainly all these countries, China, America, India, will have to do more than what Paris dictates to actually fully solve the problem. But it's a framework, it's a beginning. And so you can't say that they're not trying, that they're not, they're not wholly ignoring the problem at this point, but they got a ways to go still. So I would argue that once you have that initial buy-in, you want to keep up in the ante. You want to keep saying, okay, we've all agreed to do X. Let's push for Y. Let's push for Z until we actually get to where we want to go.
Yeah. One of the, and people have said, just like with guns, people have said, like, maybe Donald Trump would be the guy to do this. And
Al Gore tried. He went to Trump Tower. He gave the pitch.
There are arguments for why Trump. It's understandable that people might have thought maybe Trump being idiosyncratic and maybe he would have done that. But what you just described, this leadership where America is going to have kind of a almost a noblesse oblige philosophy, whereby American exceptionalism means that we are leading and we're going to, in some cases, make sacrifices to set an example. That's not Trump's MO. Like, Trump is, if you were to really try to sum up Trumpism and his worldview, the America First thing is very much like, we are not gonna make sacrifices for the rest of the world. We need to get a better deal.
Well, even to add to that, I mean, the way to get China's buy-in is to come up with a plan that doesn't hobble China economically. You have to, just like by getting the corporate buy, like a lot of corporations, a lot of fossil fuel companies will say, look, we are already transitioning to a diverse set of energy sources. We are preparing for this clean energy future. We want this to go perhaps on a slower track so we can finish our transition. We don't want to be put out of business. But give us the means to adapt so we can still make money going forward, and we'll be on board. China the same way. We can go to China and say, look, you're going to be an economic power. You're going to rule the roost in Asia. You're going to be, on par with us, down the line. We're not trying to stop that from happening. We just want your partnership so the planet's still here. You could find a solution there. But if your MO is, we want to defeat China, we want America to win and China to lose, you're not going to get that cooperation. Yeah. And on top of that, I think the other thing that makes it impossible for Trump to, be idiosyncratic here is his whole political lifeblood is fueling a culture war, and climate has become a culture war political football.
Oh, that's the whole key. I mean, look, and you said several things that I would love to delve into, including, well, my plan is we win, they lose as well. But I'll skip all that. You've just essentially summed up the problem. This is now like a proxy war. It's not about, is a carbon tax good policy or bad policy. This is where you stand on this is symbolic of your tribe, and therefore it becomes almost impossible to negotiate and to compromise on.
Well, and this is why people like Bernie and Warren and others who are generally, Bernie's political vision is revolution, mass mobilization. Warren's is, she has some of that in her rhetoric, some of the movement building in her rhetoric, but also I'm going to change the rules, I'm going to get rid of the filibuster, I'm going to pack the court. None of it is, I'm going to depolarize these issues so we can more easily find bipartisan solutions. And look, climate has become deeply polarizing, deeply tribal, and it's not crazy to argue that you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, that you can't depolarize it. So there's no way to get from point A to point B without through, just shoving it through, partisan, 51-49, so on and so forth. My concern about that is that if it remains a culture war issue, if it remains a polarizing issue, you can be ram-sling through 51-49 without a filibuster, but then that political pendulum swings the other way, and it gets repealed in 2 years. This is what happened in Australia. They had a carbon tax for a year, and then the Conservative Party, which are the Liberals there, they ran against that carbon tax, won the next election, and immediately repealed it. So that's my big concern. I think you have to depolarize it to ensure that policy stays on the books, and the policy meat of the subject does not have to be polarizing. There are solutions that are not inherently liberal or conservative, and you want to try to find those solutions. And if you can beat Trump bad enough, maybe you can simmer those partisan cultural tensions enough to find enough Republicans who will be willing to break bread with you. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying I know it's going to happen, because I think this is a deeply polarized subject over several years. I just think, as far as my choices are concerned, that both terrible, both politically challenging, that I think that's the better one to try to pursue.
I think you're right. All right. Well, now that we've solved that, we want to get into some rank punditry here.
Sure. So Biden remains the nominal frontrunner. He has not dipped in the polls in the past couple of weeks. Yet it's still, his news cycles are still generally bad. It's one quote unquote gaffe after another, however you want to define these things. There's the war story issue that's probably had the most legs. CNN is digging into his Iraq war statement, saying he's not being truthful about when he turned against the war in Iraq. Now you have this issue from the Climate Forum where there was a Bernie supporter that asked him in the Q&A period, why are you having a fundraiser with a fossil fuel executive? You signed a pledge not to do that. And Biden was like, well, I didn't know that was happening. And Andrew Goldman, he's not a fossil fuel executive. And so the long and short of it is, Andrew Goldman, who was a former advisor of Biden, so it's someone who he knows, and has since become a hedge fund investor, helped found a liquefied natural gas company. So he's listed on the website as a co-founder, but he's not an executive. He's not listed in the SEC filings as the president or the chair. So he has no direct responsibility over the decision-making of the company. And so, for all I know, while we're taping, Biden's abandoned this fundraiser, but his campaign was saying last night he is not an executive. Biden has not violated the pledge by doing this event. And so I think one of the activists behind the pledge had a tweet from saying, all right. It's not, he's following the letter of the pledge, but not the spirit of the pledge. This is not a good look for him. So it's just one more thing. Yeah. So it's always something with Biden. There's always something that's dogging him. And yet you don't see reflected in the polls. You just had a poll yesterday out of Wisconsin, which something is the tipping point state perhaps in this election, Wisconsin, and Biden beats Trump by 9, Bernie by 4, and everyone else were ties, right. I think.
No, I think we've now entered this point where there are 3 or 4 Democrats who are still in it. And that's Biden, Warren, Bernie, and maybe Kamala. And they're competing to take on Donald Trump, where the election will be about 3 or 4 states, which would be Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida. And then you ask yourself,
I'm not sure about Florida. I might just give Florida to Trump.
Well, that's important. I mean, if you cede that, but
the Democrats can win in the Rust Belt and take it back.
Yeah. And how many thousands votes were there? Right.
It was like 70,000 votes combined between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, determining the whole thing.
So that could be the ballgame, right? If you just have a few thousand votes here in the right places. But you would ask yourself, let's assume that you're right, Bill. Of these Democrats, the 3 or 4 that I think that most experts agree are in contention, who has the best chance of winning Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin? Pretty clear it's Joe Biden, right?
I mean, there was a Michigan poll a few days ago where Biden was clearly doing the best, and now Wisconsin. Now, you could argue this is name ID, and once other candidates have higher name ID, they'll do better. And that, generally speaking, is true. And I wouldn't take a state poll, 1.5 years out to the bank as being ultimately predictive. Having said that, Bernie's name ID is as high as Biden's. And there are some polls where Bernie does quite well versus Trump, but Biden is much more consistently a strong performer versus Trump than Bernie is.
I think anecdotally, it also just makes sense. I mean, Joe Biden's from Pennsylvania. If you believe that the key is not Romney, Obama, Trump voters, but that the key is increasing African American turnout, if you believe that, why would you think that Bernie or Warren could do that better than Biden? I don't see an argument for anybody other than Biden if you assume the premise that these 3 states are the path, right? Now, I think it's possible to imagine a scenario. I've been really surprised by Kamala Harris that she has not done better. And I keep her in my mix because I think there's a lot of potential there still, unexploited potential for her to have another moment. Maybe that sounds crazy because she's gone backwards since the first debate. But maybe there's a chance for her to do a different map, like Georgia, North Carolina, or something. You know
Arizona.
What I mean? But,
maybe even Texas.
Well, I think that Texas is in play, but I think everyone smart that I talk to says, like, if Democrats win Texas,
other states will have been coming in play before then. Sure. So, but to your point,
Biden is the obvious person.
But I think you're touching something very interesting here that I don't think has been explored very much, because there is definitely the broader debate. Is it converting white working class in the Rust Belt, or is it juicing the natural Democratic base of youth and people of color? And the assumption is that Biden is the Rust Belt guy and not the base motivation guy. Yet he's the one that does best with African Americans.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the end of that debate, because Biden does best with older African Americans, and Bernie does better with younger ones. So you can still argue that Bernie is your best bet for mobilizing the youth vote. I mean, Bernie is definitely disproportionately strong with young voters. I think Biden might still have an edge in some polling, but his strongest base is older voters. And so Bernie does. He does second best with people of color on the strength of the youth vote. I mean, the youth is sort of the bigger determining factor there between are you for Bernie or are you for Biden. Warren has kind of struggled, even though, she's really working to win the African American vote and Latino vote. She's got a lot of praise from activist leaders in those communities. but it hasn't translated into actual numbers on the ground, at least what we see in polls. So it's one of the points that I've made way back when I wrote a piece about how to determine electability. It's fine to tell me what your theory of the case is, but prove to me you can execute your theory of the case. Bernie at least can say, look, there's evidence I do well with young voters. And I will do better with young voters than Biden. Well, I'll get his old voters. They may not be with me right now, but I'll get them against Trump.
Yeah.
But he can't get the young voters that I can get. I can pull people off the sidelines who are disengaged. Now, the counter is you can't get his old voters. Maybe they won't go for you because you're too far left.
Right. If there was a piece you sent me a couple days ago, Bill, in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which looked at Obama-Trump voters, white working class voters who voted in Pennsylvania for Obama and Trump. And I think it was a third of them are open to voting for a Democrat as long as that Democrat is not too radical.
Yeah.
So it seems, and by the way, Bernie Sanders is radical.
And Bernie still makes the argument that he can win those voters back through, pure populist democratic socialism. They don't want mushy stuff. They want to bring the wood to corporate America on their behalf, and that's why he would be a better bet. They don't want someone who's going to Wall Street fundraisers. They don't want someone playing footsie with China. They want the meat. And again, I'm not going to say flatly he's right or wrong, but that is one data point. This was a focus group researcher who was quoted in that Inquirer article that cuts against what Bernie is arguing.
It is interesting to me, and I'm not an identity politics guy, but it is interesting to me that Trump, Warren, Biden, and Bernie are all white people of a certain age. In this country, with this Democratic field, and that's part of why I've always thought. I mean, Kamala Harris, it's younger, African American, female, and I think she has the potential to be the unrealized potential to be like a change agent, exciting, tap into like a little bit of hope and change. And it's interesting to me that like in 2019, our top 4 politicians in America are like 70, the average are like a 70-year-old white person.
Well, there's been a couple of stories lately, sort of like, what's going on with Kamala? Why isn't she taking off? There was actually a National Review piece yesterday that cited a tweet of mine because I point out, you look at the Real Clear Politics average since mid-July, it's all flat. It's all flat, but for Kamala going down.
Yeah.
There's also Warren having a rise. Like, she had the rise. The rise, I mean, I'm not saying she can't continue to rise. I mean, I'm not predicting the future here. I'm just saying
she has the right to rise.
In the past month, she has not risen in the national polling. If you think she is, it's because you've cherry-picked the polls where she's done well, and you're ignoring the polls where she's not doing as well. The average, she's flat over the past month and a half.
There was that one outlier poll that had her actually winning.
Right. But I think there was one that came out yesterday where she was ahead, but that's change research, which is generally not considered a credible operation. They've often had polls that are way different than what everyone else has. So that's sort of sparked a series of pieces. What's going on with Kamala? And I think it was one of Rubio's former campaign aides that said she's the Rubio of the race. Like, she makes all the sense on the world on paper, and she's perfectly good on the stump, but she hasn't found her lane. She hasn't gotten that deep reservoir of support that puts her into the top tier. And as much as we talk about youth on the Democratic side, Biden, Warren, Bernie they're not all establishment. They are all established. They are established figures. They've been around. They've cultivated a real base of support. They have distinct ideologies and distinct issue sets, and that people in their bases respond to. And so it's not so easy to dislodge them. People might have thought that in advance about Bernie and Warren, but not Biden. But I think we're seeing there are hardcore Biden people. There are people that are deeply moderate, who are very suspicious of the far left in the Democratic Party, generally older people.
Yeah.
And they're not so easy. I mean, there's a CBS report that went around an Iowa Labor Day event, and this wasn't a candidate-specific event, but definitely the people they were speaking to were older people, and asking what do you think about Biden's gas. They're all kind of like, he's a human being. Look at that Trump guy. He's way worse.
Yeah.
And you react that way.
I mean,
if you already like the guy. If you don't like the guy, when I see on Twitter everyone dumping on Biden gaffes, these are people that would be very forgiving if it was their guy doing it, but they dump on it because they don't like Biden, and they might generally worry that's going to be a problem in the general, and so they're quick to jump on it. But about a third of the Democratic electorate is not there, and that's been enough for him to retain his front runner position.
Didn't he have like a blood vessel burst in his eye or something during the town hall or something weird? I mean, like little stupid things like that, which apparently from all the doctors on Twitter is pretty common and non.
I know people my age that have had that. I mean, that's not a sign of that you're about to die. It just looks kind of freaky.
But is that the kind of thing? I wonder about, we saw what happened with Hillary last time, and I think health is a legitimate.
Oh, health is, but a burst blood vessel in your eye is not a tumor,
I know that, but I'm just saying, like, so there are gaffes that are problematic because they speak to like authenticity and honesty but then there are the gaffes that are problematic because they speak to like, has this guy lost a step? Is he doddering? And we know Donald Trump, even though he's an old guy too, it's pretty predictable that Donald Trump, if Biden's the nominee, is going to try to mock Biden and cast him as being like doddering, old, not up for the job. And Biden will probably kind of play into that. Now, I wonder if the narrative really takes hold and damages Biden.
Well, I think this is interesting because, when Hillary had her incident, general election, most Democrats were on board with Hillary. When that happened, you didn't see a lot of Democrats saying, "Oh man, she's about to die. We better swap her the ticket." People were defending her like, people have dehydration issues. You're on the stump nonstop. She came out. Then a few minutes later, she looked fine. Let's all get over it. And it's the Republicans who wanted to mock it and make a big deal about it because they wanted to discredit her. Your interpretation of the event is based on your partisan position, your viewpoint. Biden yesterday, in the climate debate, however you disagree with what he said or your belief of his general ideological view, he was sharp in the climate forum. This was you saw him for 30 minutes. He knew his policy. He explained it cogently. You could argue that his tone wasn't great, that he sounded defensive, that he sounded like he was maybe a little peeved with the tenor of the questioning. But he was functioning. The guy had clear cognitive function. And most of the time when we talk about him losing it, it's because of a headline on Twitter or a snippet. When you see him in a long-form setting, generally speaking, I think there were certain examples where he might have been a little more low energy. But I think on the whole, 30-minute interview on CNN, long-form discussion, he's fine. But you don't see those folks worry about it saying, "Oh, he actually looked fine there. Forget what I said about him being doddering. I think he's actually okay." You find the other thing to get mad about. Well, he was Weasley about the fundraiser. Oh, he's got a blood vessel thing in his eye. Oh, what does that mean? If you don't like him, you look for a thing to get mad about. If you like him, you defend him, whatever the thing is. But I'm trying to be an unbiased, objective person here. My sense is the kind of quote-unquote gaffes he's making are the kind of gaffes he has always made.
Yeah.
He's always done, things that are sort of outright weird. You look at sort of the Vermont, New Hampshire, like, well, that's just weird. Well, calling him Barack America on the day he's being announced as vice president is also weird. He's always been that guy. So I don't see the mental acuity issue Now, there are other issues, perhaps. You might just say that he's always been this is not a selling point.
It's just funny that a guy... Okay, when Obama ran, and trust me, I mean, I know there were plenty of criticisms and attacks on Obama and all that, but basically you had this sense that this was a movement. He had the wind at his back. He was being, he's the most popular celebrity of the world. I mean, there was all this affection and excitement, and he was almost worshipped in a sense, right? With Biden, this is a guy who's basically stumbling his way, like every day, stumbling his way into the nomination and possibly into the presidency. But there's not going to be a day when Joe Biden's like, everybody loves me, I'm awesome. It's like he keeps, I don't want to say failing forward, but there's not like a great easy day where he's completely kicking ass. But he just keeps winning.
Bill Clinton had a fairly bumpy ride to the nomination. I mean, Jerry Brown, he started with the Jennifer Flowers stuff, and he ended with Jerry Brown harping on Whitewater. I mean, it was never a smooth path for him, but he still got it. And Biden might have a similar kind of trajectory. And people were sort of befuddled. Why is this happening? How could this be? How can I have so many bad news cycles and still be this way? And I think not being the new guy, being someone who people are familiar with, I mean, it's not just like he's been around. It's like I've seen this guy function as senator and vice president, and I know he is like this, and I know he is still a competent person who knows policy and knows world leaders and will be a steady person at the till, unlike the current guy that I have. Which is why, if your reaction to Trump is, I don't want another amateur here, I want a pro, that makes it harder for a Buttigieg or a Beto or a Castro, and even to some extent a Kamala. I mean, I think there's better resumes than those other ones. It makes it a little bit harder for them because there is some natural desire for an old pro in the way. So it's not just an age question, it's an experience question, and Biden has clearly the most experience, and you factor that into when you look at he made a stumble here, who cares? I know he can do the job. And that's your bottom line.
All right. Well, you want to leave it there?
I should leave it there because my battery level is at 4%. So,
well, I think that's good. We call it a day.
What do you got to plug?
Let's see. Well, I am writing something at the Daily Beast today about Republicans and climate change. So, assuming that gets greenlit and goes up, check that out. As always, check out the podcast. Like I said, coming up, Bill Weld at the end of the month in Texas. So if you're in the Austin area, I'll be doing this live at the Texas Tribune Fest. Check us out.
All right. And I got nothing to plug, and I want this battery not to die. So I'm going to
see
you next week.
See you guys.
Take care.